Drone-based UAVs attacked from the Elektrodetal plant in the Bryansk region. In Belgorod, there is a total blackout due to rocket attacks.
Vlad, this is Belgorod. So basically, the coke holes hit us, and there's no electricity anywhere in Belgorod.
The governor is furious. Evacuation is starting.
The enemy struck the infrastructure.
We are currently assessing the damage.
There are significant disruptions in the electricity supply.
We have no power, the greenhouses aren't lit, nothing is on, nothing works, so we're just burning a barrel here. It's romantic for us. He's got a flashlight, he's got candles.
Honestly, I'm already scared to be in Belgorod after all this. Yeah, it's fucked up. Fucking great. Well, actually, there's power here.
Holy shit, I'm stunned. Fuck. You can see everything perfectly, damn. Just gorgeous.
That's how we live.
Breaking news, friends. A series of blackouts has begun in Russia due to shelling by forces armed for Ukraine.
Ooh, the lights just went out.
Belgorod, blackout after a strike near the CHP plant. Look.
Everything's already on fire, and it's raining. It's burning out inside. Yeah, he's fucked. Yeah, fucking oil depot, damn it.
If Russians threaten a blackout, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, then the Kremlin should know that there will be blackouts. In the capital of Russia, in Moscow, according to Zelensky. What?
What the hell happened?
In Belgorod, there is also no water supply, and Neptune missiles attacked the Karachev Elektrodetal plant in the Bryansk region. A fire broke out there, according to Russian social media channels.
They're getting wrecked, those bastards. Damn, no way. Yeah, we hit it, that's for sure.
The armed forces of Ukraine destroyed an enemy Mi-28 helicopter with FPV drones, said Madyar. But Ukrainian drones are also turning Russia's oil and gas empire into a hellish chain, writes Desant. Wow, just look at that.
It's as hot here as it is in Crimea, damn it.
In Crimea, there's still a fuel crisis going on.
Signal the car, they basically only got 95 over there. Because all the other types of fuel are only available with coupons, so we're standing in line like in the USSR. And there are no more safe zones left in Russia. Keith Kellogg confirmed that Donald Trump gave permission to strike Russian territory with American and European weapons. As I understand it, this is official. We're waiting for the Tomahawk, so... That's a train. Thief! Under the locomotive!
We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Grigorievich, what do you think about the situation in Belgorod? There's no water, no electricity, and that's because we attacked the thermal power plant. What do you say?
There's no water because there's no electricity. The pumps run on electricity. Naturally, if the electricity is shut off, those pumps stop working. Some water still comes out, but after that, naturally, until they restart generation, nothing will change. And for the Russians, it's built in a rather complicated way, or rather, it's complicated to listen to. They don't have a network system like we do. For us, you can knock out several lines and there will still be electricity because the supply comes in from at least 3 points. But for the Russians, it's linear. If you cut off the line, everything connected to that line shuts down and waits until the line is restored. So their system is quite problematic. Well, given the size of their territory, it couldn't really be any other way. Russia covers 17 million square kilometers. Obviously, only linear structures can exist there. But that's exactly what we're taking advantage of. How many times have we talked about this, right? Disabling the Russian energy sector and the economy that's tied to it can be done in a snap. Just take out the main generating facilities and the power lines that supply consumers. Again, these are linear power lines. There, if you know the structure, you can do it. The entire Russian economy would collapse, not just the refineries. So besides the fact that oil refineries and oil transportation, almost all of it runs on electric pumps, they've switched over, they're smart. We're a bit behind. We still pump gas using gas. Sometimes 7 billion cubic meters of gas are burned just to pump several tens of billions of cubic meters. Well, that's how gas pumps work. They basically consume their own gas, so to speak. But the Russians have switched to electricity. Now, if you shut off the electric pumps, everything will come to a halt. That's exactly what our long-range strike systems have started targeting now. Moreover, from the video footage, you can see that a serious munition hit the target. So it could have been fired from a HIMARS using an ATACMS, either the 100-mile or the 300-kilometer version. It could also be our missiles, which have already been announced, re-announced, and finally launched about 300 times. As of now, there is such a possibility. These announcers are already getting on my nerves, seriously. You could break your tongue from all their announcements, with all their little announcements, videos, and whining. So we do have this problem, at least for now, that is a lack of real missiles, I mean real long-range ones. Well, at least we can say that they can be used in the near abroad. It's 80 kilometers to Belgorod. Basically, a 100-kilometer range missile is enough to accomplish a combat mission. This is probably the beginning of blackouts across all of Russia. Why Belgorod? Well, it's the closest regional center to us, meaning it's within reach. Belgorod, then Kursk, next will be Kursk, as I understand it, then Bryansk, after that Voronezh, Rostov. Well, we'll see based on the range of the weapons used.
Roman Igorovich, there have been two statements. First, Keith Kellogg stated that Trump agreed to let us use American weapons to strike deep into Russian territory, that there are no restrictions or limitations in terms of range and so on. That's not the case. After that, Zelensky said, we'll strike Moscow and there will be a blackout in Moscow too. The Kremlin should get ready. How do you assess these two statements?
Well, so far, apart from slingshots, the Americans haven't given us anything. And they said, go ahead, hit Russia. Here's 1,000 slingshots. Now go ahead and fire as much as you can. Well, we tried with slingshots, but they don't reach Moscow. It's 500 kilometers to Moscow. To hit Moscow, first of all, even a simple cruise missile might not make it through. At the very least, you need ballistic missiles for that. If, for example, Kellogg or Trump or whoever, Vance, started echoing Trump now, and they gave us, for our HIMARS, those are the launchers, the PRSM or PRISMS missiles, as they're also called, with a range of 500 kilometers. Those would land right on the Kremlin. If they had handed them over and allowed it, then by all means, take them as a generous gift and fire wherever you want. In that case, Moscow would already be gone. But most likely, so far, they've only given us slingshots. And they're trying to show off, saying, we allow you to target Russian crows over Russian fields. Well, obviously that's sarcasm, but that's how it looks for now. They're just making a show for now. There are no missiles. And those missiles that we still have left from previous years, so to speak, the ones that were supplied to us, those are ATACMS. There are 100-mile ones, there are 300-kilometer ones, but not in the NZ batch. That is, if there are 1.5 or 2 dozen of them, that's the untouchable reserve. It's unlikely anyone will use them unless we're 100% sure they'll be replenished for us, at the very least. So for now, it's all just for show. Big American showmanship, so to speak. They showed off, demonstrated some of their vision of how the process will proceed further. Let's talk after something actually happens. If, for example, a Tomahawk or AGM-158 JASSM cruise missile enters Russia, if they give these missiles to the 16th, the Russians will immediately copy them and make a big fuss about it everywhere. That Americans using Ukrainians as proxies are shooting at innocent, some Moscow children. But it won't be the story of the crucified boy. They'll keep harping on it until the end of time. In other words, until we hear from the Russians themselves that American missiles have started working, we can assume that we've just been given slingshots and allowed to use them on Russian fields.
Roman Igorovich, we rarely talk about missile strikes with you. We mostly discuss drone attacks. I understand that the distance is, of course, short, which makes missile strikes possible, but the Neptune missile, this is official. It attacked the Karachev Elektrodetal plant in Russia's Bryansk region. A fire broke out. At first, there was information that these were Ukrainian drones, but then officially it was reported that it was a missile strike with a Neptune missile. What do you think?
Well, the Karachev Elektrodetal plant had a Ukrainian Karachon in its dreams. We have a mountain like that, it's interesting, and there are also some aspects related to this Karachon that are relevant for Russians as well. In other words, a strike was carried out. Finally, there is something we can really talk about, specifically as actions. This concerns the production of Neptune missiles by the Luch Design Bureau. We have the Luch Design Bureau, which has been working for several years now. For more than a decade, they have been modernizing the R-35 missile. Back in the Soviet Union, there was a very good missile, the R-35, and later the R-35U. It was mainly produced here. Our engine, our control system, in other words, it was our missile. The missile was air-to-ship. It was an anti-ship air-launched missile, meaning that it was mainly used by fighter jets at the time. I even studied it back in my day, so that was a very long time ago, over 40 years ago. So This old missile, based on it, since it was produced here, we developed the 35U missile with a greater range, about 70 kilometers up to 150 kilometers. Based on it, based on this missile, they took it off the aircraft. You could say they stole it and made it land-based. In other words, they created a launch system. Neptune, the launcher, this is the coastal missile system, Neptune. And from the start, it was produced as a missile that was no longer air-to-ship, but ground-to-ship. So it was the same anti-ship missile, but launched from the ground. We produced several launches, several of these control systems. We basically have this Neptune. We've had this missile for quite a while now. The Lush Design Bureau went further. They repurposed the missile's guidance system to work not against ships, but against ground targets. They incorporated high-precision guidance systems there, and in fact, their guidance technology is ahead of the curve. You could say it uses machine vision. It operates on the terminal phase, the final segment. When approaching the target, it already uses machine vision. In other words, it's practically artificial intelligence software. It can't be affected by electronic warfare, not at all. It no longer communicates with neither with satellites nor with ground systems. So the guys really did a great job working on this missile. Now the question is about the range of this missile. They've managed to extend it to 300 kilometers in range, surface to surface. Now the issue is increasing the range even further. So how do you make a missile with a longer range? If it has a good engine, you just need to increase the amount of fuel. The missile's center of gravity changes. It might become a bit larger, but basically, technically, there's nothing complicated about it. It can be extended to ranges of 500 to 600 kilometers, and that's the distance to where Moscow is. And 600 to 700 kilometers is already Engels, meaning you can reach as far as the Volga. So that's what the Luch Design Bureau is working on right now, and they're doing it successfully. The only thing they're lacking is funding. Funding is being thrown around on whatever comes up, on some missiles that they're trying to produce from scratch and trying to scale up some kind of production. But for now, it's just in videos and announcements. That's why I always say these announcers are getting on everyone's nerves. Come on, enough with the announcements around every corner. Pay for it. Get it done, provide the funding, and maybe then they'll churn out those Neptunes like hamburgers. And our Neptunes will be working at a range of 300 to 400 at first, just like they did, at least with that electrical component. 4 missiles hit, took out the electrical components. Zhenyak, in short, he appeared in a dream for that Karachayevsky or Karachunovsky electrical component. So in other words, we can keep working further. There are opportunities. We're a rocket country. We have crowds of specialists. The main thing is to set the task, provide funding, and not interfere in the processes. Don't try to meddle. Don't insert your own middlemen, these pontificators or anything else. Don't go looking for your own cash gap there. Give people money and they'll make rockets. And they'll strike at Russian rear areas. At least at the nearby rear, meaning the operational rear can already be targeted. Here's a vivid example today. They really did a great job. First of all, it's the Navy. Besides the fact that the missile itself is produced by Kabaluch, this missile works. It's a coastal missile system and it's still considered a coastal missile complex. The Navy is operating it. The Navy has struck. This is what they call a submarine in the steppes of Ukraine. It surfaced and fired these with Neptunes across the Russian steppes at this electrical component. So our Navy is no longer just for show. It has switched to ground targets, and rightly so. When it comes to accomplishing combat missions, all means are good. And a submarine in the steppes of Ukraine, believe me, can inflict serious damage on Russian rear positions.
Roman Nikolaevich, you always say that it's much more effective for us to strike oil refineries and airfields with missiles, especially using ballistic ones. Now we've just watched this with you. For example, Neptune struck. In your opinion, how soon will we really be able to attack Russian military targets with ballistic and cruise missiles?
Well, Elektrodetal is also a military facility. The thing is, it's tied to the Russian military industry. That's mainly what they produce, yes. So it's purely a military facility since it's involved in the overall process of military equipment production. That's why a cruise missile. The thing is, it's a cruise missile, not just any cruise missile. The ballistic missile, Grom, that we're waiting for, we keep hearing these announcements, watching the videos. No questions about it, but there are no missiles yet. And as soon as there are enough ballistic missiles, how are they different from cruise missiles? Against cruise missiles, the Russians have an air defense system that has been developed over 100 years, you could say, built up over a century of aviation experience. All the surface-to-air missile systems, all the man-portable air defense systems, and all the various mechanisms and technologies for destroying or neutralizing missiles and aircraft. These are, for the most part, mainly designed and intended to counter aerial targets, so-called, that is, those that stay aloft using wings. In other words, anything that flies on wings at various altitudes. This could be drones, cruise missiles, airplanes, basically anything that flies according to the laws of aerodynamics. Against all of these, nearly 100% of Russian air defense systems are effective. That's why it's very difficult for cruise missiles, drones, in other words, aerial targets, to break through. Through, first of all, the dense frontal defenses of the enemy. And then there are the protected sites, especially if the site is at the level of Moscow or the Kerch Peninsula. That's why for cruise missiles in this context, there is hope only when operating in the near-rear areas at the operational level, where it's still possible to break through the frontal air defense and reach a target that doesn't have its own dedicated protection. But in reality, of course, a missile, a subsonic one, any missile, but mostly subsonic ones, there is only one cruise missile that flies at supersonic speed, and that's the Kh-22. This is that terrifying missile that we once handed over to the Russians, and they used them against us. It's not accurate, but it's supersonic, and it's very difficult to intercept. But all cruise missiles are an easy target for Russian air defense. The difficult target for Russian air defense is ballistic missiles, because almost all surface-to-air missile systems that work well against cruise missiles perform poorly against ballistic missiles, against things that come from space. That is, first it goes into space, then it falls back down from space. Especially the speeds in the final phase, as it approaches the target, they are extremely high in the hypersonic range, that is 3 to 5 Mach. It's very difficult to calculate the interception point with a surface-to-air missile system, including Russian ones. That's why for us, the production of ballistic missiles is especially important. And the most interesting thing is we used to produce them. Gram is our missile. It has a range of 300 to 500 kilometers, which we are capable of achieving, just like the Neptune. Well, let's say 300 to 400 kilometers for that one, up to 500 kilometers for the cruise missile. For now, at least, we need to focus on this and definitely keep taking them out. We're no longer in the position we were back then when we already have to keep taking them out. We had this missile, we should have it. It just needs to be funded. The middlemen need to be removed. The cash gaps need to be eliminated. And the pennies that corrupt officials insert into all these processes need to be taken out. And then the missile will go, we'll see it again. And you and I will still be talking about how our ballistic missiles are striking Russia's military targets.
Roman Lvovich, after yet another massive missile and drone strike by Russia's 600 drones, almost 50 missiles, there was a broadcast, and military analysts on air expressed the opinion that if we were to strike strategic military airfields and drone bases with missiles permanently, constantly, then we would simply be preventing these drone and missile attacks. But unfortunately, drones cannot inflict such damage. Do you agree with this opinion?
Well, the thing is, yes, it would be better to burn all of Russia, 17 million square kilometers, douse it in diesel and set it on fire. And it would all burn down and everything would be lost. Well, it's something that's theoretically possible, but technically impossible to carry out. So yes, it would be good to strike at the launch sites. But what is a launch site? The launch site for, say, a drone, it's a vehicle. It's not just ground-based launchers, it's also mobile vehicles. But how would you locate it in the end? If you're going to strike something, it should be the places where they're produced or stored. That is, if you're going to reach as far as Alabuga or Izhevsk, or even a Chinese factory that mainly produces the key components, or the storage sites, meaning the places where these drones are kept. Because the launch points, they can change them 10 times a day. It's just unrealistic. Strike at airfields? No problem with that. Of course, it's good to strike at airfields. But what's the issue? Take the Engels airfield, for example. What can actually reach it from our side at this point? I'll tell you, nothing except drones. But the drones that have made it through, that have broken through the frontline air defenses, and that's practically 5 Russian regions along the borderline, all packed with air defense systems. That's Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, Voronezh, and Rostov. Exactly. These regions, for several hundred kilometers in depth, are packed with air defense systems. This is Russia's frontline air defense. Try breaking through it. And as for what does manage to break through, let's say a few drones make it through by the time they crawl their way to Engels, making a racket the whole way. And I say making a racket on purpose because that's exactly what they do. They've got internal combustion engines. It takes them several hours. Their speed is 150 kilometers per hour. The range is over 500 kilometers, so it takes more than 3 to 4 hours. That's how long it takes to get there. Yeah, and by that time, they'll already be pretty much ready to just shoot them down. So in reality, it's impossible for drones to inflict serious damage, say, on airfields or military facilities, except, well, maybe oil refineries. Those could be hit by drones. Even a single drone hitting a distillation tower can take out an entire oil refinery until the tower is rebuilt. Another place where drones can be used is along the coastline and, for example, in Crimea, since the Russians can't cover from the sea because we've driven their ships away. This can be covered by ship-based air defense. But if the ships have been driven away, it means you can approach Crimea. If you push the Russian ships further back into the base, then in principle, you can use drones against Novorossiysk, Sochi, Adler, and along the coastline, including against Russian targets too. That's it. We can't use drones anywhere else. Well, based on our capabilities, at least. Russian air defense at the moment means we need missiles. And of course, we need long-range missiles. Again, ballistic ones. Because even to Tarakti, to that same Alabuga, look, the missile is flying. Let's say it's going at near supersonic speed. Maybe it even accelerates to 900 to 950 kilometers per hour. It will take more than an hour to reach Alabuga. At least several radar stations will track it. Russian ones, they'll scramble fighter jets and the fighters will simply shoot it down. They might not scramble fighters for a drone, maybe because it's a pity to use planes for that. But, for example, for a missile, they will definitely scramble fighters because they'll immediately understand from the speed that it's a missile. So either a drone is buzzing along at 150 kilometers per hour, or a missile is flying at 950. In other words, a cruise missile is also difficult. So we're waiting for ballistic missiles. And here's what I want to say. Without ballistic missiles, including long-range ones, yeah, okay, when it comes to missile, with solid fuel, I mean, you can cover 500 to 600 kilometers. But to go distances over 1,000 kilometers, you already need liquid fuel. That is for liquid fueled engines, which in principle, we can produce both solid fuel and liquid fuel engines. We have the specialists. Again, it's a matter of setting the task, technical requirements, and funding. And naturally, all of this should be done by people who understand manufacturing. Not artists, not clowns, not hustlers in the end, but specifically people with a military education who understand perfectly. Here you need two educations, a basic military one and at least a technical one related to the production of this kind of equipment. And then in principle, these issues can be solved at our facilities. Then we won't need anyone, I mean our partners. We will be able to produce these missiles ourselves. We just need to replace the executive branch. This has been said a billion times. No elections, no re-elections, none of that. None of these political squabbles. We just need to replace the executive branch with people who have a basic military and technical education. There are plenty of such people. We just need to bring them in.
Roman Nikolaevich, SBU drones attacked and shut down the operation of an oil pumping station in the Chuvash Republic of Russia. What do you have to say about that?
Well, now he's got a thing for Chuvash women. First he was into Tatar women, then Bashkir women. Now he's interested in Chuvash women. Well, it's kind of not a picky leader, or maybe the opposite, very picky. But of course, that's just my good-natured sarcasm. We all understand that. And the SBU guys, well, they're doing great, really impressive. They already hit Tatarstan, then Bashkortostan, and now they've made it to Chuvashia. They're starting to minus oil pumping stations. There are billions of them there since they talked about it. But what are oil pumping stations? 3 pieces in a row. If it's minus, then there will be pressure in the pipe, pipe in pipe. Zero. Well, not zero, but atmospheric. I mean, that is, there will be no more pumping. And it's possible and even necessary to stop the Russian oil industry, including by destroying these kinds of oil pumping stations. There's only one question. Here's my question for the targeter. Let me put it this way. I'll ask in military terms. Why fly more than 1,000 kilometers to knock out some oil refinery or oil pumping station when just 50 kilometers away the Druzhba oil pipeline is sitting there with a main oil pumping station that's still pumping Russian oil further? What's the point of that? So that's the question here. There's a pipeline lying right next to us to the north. This very same pipeline actually runs through Ukraine. You don't need to fly anywhere. You just need to turn the valve. Just turn the valve and forget about pumping $18 million a day. That pipeline over there, the one in Chuvashia, what it's actually pumping is a big question. And one refinery, or rather one pump, won't solve the problem. You'd need to take out at least 3 of them in a row. And they're right there, just 50 kilometers away. You don't even have to fly far to get there. Just make a decision and get the job done. Or arrest under Article 111 for treason, whoever forbade you from doing this. And this doesn't just apply to Malyuk, it also concerns Budanov and the same mother, that is Syrskyi, in other words, the generals who fully understand what the pipeline means. Druzhba pumps $18 million into the Russian treasury every day, 300,000 barrels of oil. That's what goes through that pipeline. But here's the most interesting part. They go to Uzluga. The same SBU guys flew to Uzluga to take out the terminal there. But the pipeline to Uzluga, where does it come from? From Unecha. So why on earth did they have to fly to Uzluga when they could have just gone to Unecha, 40 kilometers away, and taken out that pumping station? But honestly, this is absolutely incomprehensible. And to this day, no one has been arrested among those who are preventing this from happening.
Roman Igorovich, the British newspaper The Sun, came out with a front-page story. Ukrainian drones are turning Russia's oil and gas empire into a hellish chain. Long-range drones from the SBU and defense forces are dealing a serious blow to the Russian economy by striking at its heart. Oil and gas industry facilities. According to The Sun, Ukraine has already inflicted about $100 billion in damages on Russia. Military intelligence expert Philip Ingren, he noted the effectiveness of using long-range drones, which attack targets at distances of over 1,000 kilometers, as you just mentioned. So in September of this year alone, the SBU successfully struck Russian oil refineries and oil pumping stations 5 times. Deep inside the country, they hit Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat in Bashkortostan twice. In Bashkortostan, one of the largest oil refining and petrochemical plants in Russia, which is located less than 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine. Roman Nikolaevich, what do you think?
It's what we've been saying for at least half a year. The optimal way how we can win this war. Actually, it's not just optimal, it's the only way. There is simply no other option. The only way for us to defeat the Russian army is to destroy the Russian state by bringing about its collapse through the destruction of its economy, just like what happened with the Soviet Union. This has all been done before. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It was invented long before us. You just have to get on and ride, as they say. So to break up the Russian state, it's possible by collapsing its economy. Because what is the Russian Federation really? And what are these so-called federists of Russia after all? It's dozens of peoples and ethnicities. It's 21 republics that are part of the Russian Federation. They didn't play the fool with the 22nd one, remember, as we said before. They took our Crimea as the 22nd, added it to the Russian constitution. That's overdoing it, folks. It's called losing everything. I mean, as I said, they've got issues with the score. I mean, I was talking about the game, just to be clear, don't get me wrong. So Russia's main problem is exactly this, the economy. If you stop it, that is, stop the inflow of petrodollars, the republics that are part of the Russian Federation, most of which, more than 12.5, are not subsidized by Moscow. So why are they even part of the Russian Federation at all? It's because Moscow redirects those petrodollars to them, the ones they get from selling oil and gas. That's all there is to it. As soon as all this stops, they'll scatter. Not all 100%, but they'll scatter wherever they can. Just like how the 15 republics of the Soviet Union split up, and over there, they're already prepared. They've got their skis ready, their suitcases packed. Some even have their own governments. And did you know, by the way, that some already have their own governments? For example, we recognize the English government, and Ukraine, by the way, recognized the English Republic, the English people, and so on. And I think we'll continue to recognize more. In other words, that's the only mechanism by which the Russian army can be defeated. Why? Because what is an army? It's a derivative of the state. No state, no army. That's the only way. 700,000 have gone. They'll be ground down, well, to put it mildly, with sweat and effort. But the optimal way is through the destruction of Russia's oil industry. That's what has only been happening for the past 2 months. How long have we been talking about this with you? About half a year, saying this is what needs to be done. 2 months of work and 100 billion have gone down the drain. And what if we keep this up until the end of the year? That's it. The Russian economy will be gone. Nabiulina, that's love, my dear. The Tatar woman, Nabiulina, she'll keep the printing press running for about another year. And they'll survive for another year on that printed money, but by the end of 2026, it's over. So Nabiulina will hang herself with the money she managed to unfreeze for us, and now we're supposed to get it. There are over 200 billion euros worth of those securities. By the way, they should put up a monument to Nabiulina in Kyiv. Once she hangs herself, we'll put up a monument. Because you don't put up monuments to people while they're alive. They'll put one up after she dies. That's the kind of mechanism for the collapse of the Russian Empire. It's already been set in motion. And now all the analysts are starting to talk about it. They've finally opened their eyes. But how long have Dasha and I been saying this? We've been talking about it for half a year. Every broadcast is the most interesting topic.
And
now we're saying that this problem could be made even worse if the Druzhba oil pipeline is destroyed. And in every broadcast, we'll be asking, so what's going on with Druzhba? today it pumped another $18 million.
Yes, Roman Grigorievich, you say this every broadcast, as they say, it's not us, it's the absolute truth. You always say it's a side effect. I completely understand that. In Crimea, the fuel crisis continues. It's colossal. But from a military standpoint, can we take advantage of the fuel crisis in occupied Crimea, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, we need to understand what we're talking about. The fuel crisis is affecting the civilian population. We can't take advantage of it in any way. This is a problem for the Russian occupation authorities. The negative consequences fall on Moscow naturally, and so on and so forth. For us, it's just a negative for Moscow, that's all. Again, all these Moscow figures, all those not yet dead Kyosayans, meaning the wives of the Kyosayans, are still spinning it against us anyway. They say we're doing something somewhere, somehow. We're fighting, we're at war. In other words, this is Moscow's problem. They seized Crimea, but for example, they can't provide for it. Crimea can't be supplied with fuel, Donbas can't be supplied with water. And most interestingly, Moscow can't supply itself with brains, judging by, at the very least, its senseless actions. That's the minimum. So this really is a side effect. But as for a real, say, fuel crisis that could affect the Russian army, at this stage, that's impossible for one simple reason. Why did we spend 6 months saying every day that the Russian oil industry needed to be destroyed? It was so that the Russians wouldn't be able to prepare enough fuel for the Russian army. But they did prepare it. And those green profiteers who let them prepare it, by not allowing our generals to destroy the oil industry over 6 months, created a certain stockpile for the Russian army to complete the summer military campaign. Now, at this point, we've already done nothing. The Russian army is supplied with fuel for several months, thanks to the 6 months they spent stockpiling it. Because fuel in the army is managed a bit differently. That is, it's already been distributed along certain directions. It's very difficult there, all those depots are already gone. Well, that's the specificity of so-called army reserves. Even down to the last drop of gasoline, well, tanks, or rather diesel, for example, the tanks will take it from the tractor driver. Well, you understand yourself, unless they put a bottle there together and smash it. Whether they smash it or not, or maybe they do, that's just how things are done among the Russians.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few top-class comments in support of our tandem and Ukraine's armed forces. Together with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetlan, we do live streams 3 times a week on my YouTube channel. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you this Wednesday.
Goodbye.